For those of you not familiar with RHEA, we are a security and space engineering services company with over 600 employees based across Europe and Canada. So RHEA's focus is to add value to our customers through the delivery of specific technologies, techniques, and expertise. So the webinar today is to discuss a key market in which we provide that expertise, namely the commercial space market. As I mentioned in my introduction, this is a significant growth sector within space. We have moved from the early days of exploration and Apollo and astronauts to now what is a vibrant commercial business, with the majority of the Earth's population utilizing and relying on space services in their everyday lives. So Pascal, having been involved in this sector for many years, how is the commercial space sector changing, and what future opportunities does this sector bring?
Thanks, John. I think the most important thing to note is that, I mean, there has been a very strong transformation of the space sector over the last decades. As you know, and as everybody knows, until 10 years ago, the space market was dominated by big players, satellite operators, satellite manufacturers, simply because the element was very focused and limited to people who could afford having strong investment capabilities, and we were mostly supported by national funds and supports. But as you rightly mentioned, John, space activities now is impacting everyday's life. The space, what we call the space to Earth activities, are representing 95% of the space investments today. And that really gave to the space activities and to the space market a visibility to everybody's world, and which is much more bigger than what it was in the past. And that stimulated from the very core most investment by the people, an easier access to funds to finance space activities, much easier than what it was decades before. And that triggered the interest of smaller players in the market. So compared to a situation where decades ago, only big players were able to have their say in the market, now we are in a situation where small players can have easy access to funds, can take initiatives, start up their business, should it be in Europe or in the US or in the rest of the world, in a much easier way than when it was before. And this is happening on the entire value chain of the space market, from launches, and everybody knows about SpaceX, and how it has transformed the space business compared to what it was before, very institutional to a completely market and commercially driven perspective, up to the satellite manufacturers. And I think Eduardo will talk about GOMSpace and the success of GOMSpace and how they are able to provide space as a service, which is a very important aspect, up to the downstream services of the value chain, where data originated from space is really the core of the business today. And so the space market now is really much more open compared to what it was before, which is a good thing, because for the end users that we are all each be at individual level, it creates competition, it creates alternatives to us as end users, but it's also creating a lot of opportunities for business and added value businesses for a lot of players which could not exist before. And this is really an important aspect, which is highly exciting. As you said, it's a vibrant market today, highly exciting for a lot of players who could have a say, who could take initiative, who are supported, who could access to funds for funding their initiatives. and which are opening a new set of areas which are very relevant and with an impact on everyday's life, which is more vibrant. So I think the space market is really an open chapter today. The actors and the players that we have around the table in the panel today are there to witness that. We just have to seize the opportunity and make sure that at European level and at our company level, we take the edge of the best of it for the society and make sure that space can serve the society at best as it has done over the last years and decades. That's how I would summarize it, John.
Thank you, Pascal. And so leading on from that, Andy, so Pascal mentioned a combination of downstream applications and access for smaller players. So with your background in Earth observation, could you tell us a little bit more about the opportunities that are created in the EO field and remote sensing field, and particularly in relation to what you're doing today?
Sure. Thank you, John. Thanks for the invitation to speak to everyone today. Yeah, it's hard to know where to start because there seems to be so much going on. It's not a day goes by that I don't see an announcement of a constellation being launched or some investment being raised into either what we might call an explicitly upstream company with satellites or some sort of new downstream company. The FT reported in the last few days the growth in the number of small companies now setting up to do forest counting, tree counting and forest carbon, you know, all driven, I think, by the sense of obviously move to net zero as society, concern over supply chain sustainability, deforestation as an issue, but of course the move to valuing carbon, and we're going to see a lot more of that in future, which I think is one of the opportunities we should dwell on a bit later. So this is all very exciting. You know, I've been around the sector for 25 years, and we've moved from a time when, you know, we were wondering what to do with Landsat, and Landsat flipped between a public and a commercial entity. Then I was part of the studies that helped underpin the case for Copernicus, and I think Copernicus has been one of the most exciting revolutionary systems to come on our doorstep. I know a lot of commercial players were concerned about that because of the sense of, you know, public systems stealing commercial market opportunity. I think my view would be it has completely the other opposite effect. We've now got a baseline system providing some of the best quality data, reliable data, which we can now base investments on many years into the future. Now it's going to be reliably delivered. That clearly for the downstream sector is a massive boost in terms of full free open data, which we can use for many applications. I've referred to one, but there's many others. And of course, the opportunity then to gap fill to provide additional capability. I would always say that we are still supply limited in Earth observation. I don't know that we've got necessarily the right combination of optical, hyperspectral and synthetic aperture radar images that are covering all the things that we need to cover for every application. So yeah, cloud cover, of course, is the big problem. And I know that's driving a lot of the interest in small constellations of smaller satellites that can provide additional data. And when you combine that with advances in things like onboard data processing and AI approaches to downloading just the data you need, looking between the clouds, I think we're yet to see that really deliver, but that's going to come along and, you know, just enabling the scaled up constellation idea, which is all. Of course, we can't mention constellations without talking about Planet in Earth observation. I remember when it was called Cosmogia, and the guys from led by an English chap, I believe, Will Marshall, came over to the UK and was looking for investment and partnerships, but they called it Cosmogia at the time, and everyone thought, what is that? That sounds anything but an Earth observation mission. It became Planet, and you know, the rest is history. I think 2 billion valuation last time the major fundraise. I sometimes wonder whether it's really for Earth observation in the civil sense. A lot of the presentations you see are about military observation, and we have to remember that a lot of markets are still very much underpinned in terms of procurement of data by the defence sector. I think Euroconsult's last figures were that of a 4.6 billion market now, which the commercial Earth observation market represents. 1.6 billion of that is procurement of data of the likes of Planet's commercial data, but probably more like Maxar and those sort of guys. But it's massively dominated by NGA and US DoD spend. It's a different story in the downstream value added world, where I think at the moment the market is estimated at around 3 billion per annum, which and the customer base is much more broad in environment, natural resources, infrastructure, location-based services, and that kind of thing. And my sense would be that that's more driven by the publicly available data sets, which are feeding businesses who, it reduces the barrier to entry in terms of access to data. That's due to double in the next 10 years. I don't know whether the dynamics will shift further. I think the sense is that the downstream market is going to grow faster than the pure data sales. So if you're in data sales, I think you have to be wary. Planet, I think if you notice the last quarterly report that we'll put out on the web, there's an interesting phrase in there in there that says we're transitioning to becoming a software company, which I think is very interesting as they move away from how the hell do you sell megabytes of data to maybe becoming more about the tools that you need to extract information and feed that to your clients directly. So I'm very interested in all that. And maybe just the last couple of comments just on where I'm at today. I mean, I've worked in central government, so I've seen things from the policy perspective when we've been talking about things like Copernicus, which, by the way, we shouldn't forget the whole wider issue of climate change. And we worked on the PwC report that I think got the Copernicus investment over the line. And that was largely based on the role of Copernicus in delivering the information we need to make better decisions about adaptation to climate change. And people forget that. It was a big public concern that created the case for big public investment into Copernicus, which, as we've identified, has led on to so many opportunities. I now work with a company called Assimila, where we try to take all that data. We try to take a more sort of a quantitative remote sensing approach. So we're trying to turn Copernicus type data, but let's not also forget meteorological systems. You know, one of the big bone of the Earth observation world is weather forecasting. Temperature, precipitation, all these kind of data sets, which I think are often forgotten when we define what Earth observation means. But over time, when you look at, say, the temperature profiles over Seattle right now, there's a lot of people concerned about temperature. And what we're going to see a lot of is, okay, how do those changing temperature profiles affect things like the functioning of buildings and other physical infrastructure, agriculture? And I think it's going to be that combination of that kind of Earth observation, quantitative environmental parameters, combined with the more standard, what we can see on the ground, you know, where are those assets, where are the crops being grown, and then the modeling of those two together to make either hindcasts, nowcasts, or forecasts. So Earth observation data and modeling is becoming very important, I think, to answer questions that people have, and that's what Assimila focuses on. We try to bring those two things together. One example of that would be we've been working, funded by the UK Space Agency and their excellent international partnership program on pest and disease risk to crops and livelihoods for smallholders across Africa. And we use models of pest growth driven by Earth observation parameters that have to be quality assured and what have you. And then they drive a sense of where different pests that are responsible for up to 40% of crops across the world are lost to pest and disease still. And when you combine that fact with the fact that chemicals, the hard chemicals that we've relied on during the Green Revolution to help feed a growing population, those chemicals are now being regulated out of existence. So we have to be sharper, better targeted with our inputs and use information better. That's where we're driving with that kind of thing. So I think you're going to see new markets grow in that area of informing different types of agricultural practice, which is really, really interesting, combined with the kind of precision farming and other agricultural uses of Earth observation that we've traditionally had. So that's what Assimila does. We try to use Earth observation in a quantitative fashion in a modeling context to answer questions for our customers. And then the other note I've got here is Resilience Constellation. It's a startup which has still been working under the radar for a while. And this is about trying to bring all that data together, whether it's commercial or public provided, but focused on the issues of informing adaptation to climate change and improving the ability, particularly of middle and lower income countries, to adapt to that. So many of the big problems that climate change is causing, of course, is going to fall heavily on those least able to deal with it. So sea level rise in small island states, or you know, feeding growing populations across Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America. And of course, many of these countries are the ones without the knowledge or the systems to be able to deal with that very well. If you then want to start investing sensibly in sustainable agricultural production or water management, Earth observation data is a key to informing some of those long-term decisions. So you're starting to have to think about combining, well, what's the climate in these regions going to be like in say, the next 10 or 20 years, not 100 years? What are the assets that are exposed to that? In countries like Ghana, for instance, cocoa is becoming more difficult to grow as the climate changes. And it's the interface between forest practice and agricultural practice is getting quite tense. And of course, we all love the products that are generated by cocoa, but if you're Ghana, it's the #1 GDP generator for your country. Up till now, they've not had decent maps, even of their landscape. Where is cocoa being grown? How does that relate spatially to forestry and other forms of agriculture? And it wasn't until colleagues of mine at a company called Ecometrica in Scotland worked on taking Earth observation data to create these very detailed maps that they finally had a proper baseline for the government to know what's on its landscape, and for the big commodity traders to then report on exactly where are they sourcing their cocoa, how are their suppliers performing in terms of responsibility for issues such as deforestation and protected areas, water use and that kind of thing. But over time, it will become more important as an input to thinking how are cocoa growers, smallholders in Ghana who grow cocoa for part of their livelihood, but are also growing shea nuts and other products just to feed their families and generate other forms of income. All of these things are at risk of climate change. And yet most of these guys, as we've mentioned, lack the basic data sets and maps, thematic maps or sort of climate variables, climate indices to know where are these problems going to hit, when, how do we respond to them. And Resilience Constellation is trying to respond to that by bringing Earth observation data, modeling and finance to the problem. And the last point there is it's not going to be purely commercial finance. We're looking at blended finance because we believe the issues of resilience and adaptation to climate change are both a public and private responsibility. So we're not going for sort of pure VC type capital to achieve that. We're going for more blended finance, where the likes of the UN Environment Programme has advised that upwards of $500 billion a year will need to be spent on adaptation over the coming decades for issues that I've raised, you know, whether it's agricultural production in Ghana or avocado production in Mexico or coastlines. So that's we're building a fund there to invest in those kind of products, and 2/3 of that will be focused on these data and information products, and we're hopeful to invest also in some of the gap filling satellites, which, because of the CubeSat revolution, we've now got access to a much wider range of options than we had before. So yeah, that's where we're coming from.
Okay, thanks, Andy. So Eduardo, yeah, Andy alluded there to CubeSats and the market opportunity created by nanosats and CubeSats. Could you tell us a little bit more how these types of satellites are changing the commercial market and the space landscape?
Yes, and some of the topics have already been introduced by Mark and Pascal. A lot has changed in the last decade. Just over 10 years ago, CubeSats were just appearing, the first versions of them as academic projects, and a lot has happened since then. But one of the premises that they brought along was the reduction of the price point and reduction of the barrier to go into space. And many things contributed to that. The reduction of the launch costs, the ability to use spare capacity on launches of bigger satellites, the miniaturization of technology, and with that, and the proximity to Earth that you get compared to other satellites. And that enable new business cases. There's now business cases that can be considered that are enabled by the lower price point and the location of the satellite. So many missions have been launched since then, and that includes Earth observation missions that have since matured quite a lot, both with optical payloads, hyperspectral payloads, but also RF payloads for surveillance. And while in the last decade, we have seen CubeSats as enablers of technology demonstration in space. We all know that it's having a flight heritage is very important for a company to be able to productize, to commercialize their solution. A lot of the CubeSat industry was focused on that, bringing new technology into space at a low cost, demonstrate it, and then be ready for commercialization. And there are still a significant amount of IOD missions being prepared, procured, and delivered. But now with the maturity that we're seeing in the nanosatellites and the nanosatellite industry, we start to see more and more commercial applications being enabled by CubeSats. So some of the examples we can see are related to Earth observation, military programs that want to use these satellites. Some countries that previously would not be able to have a space program can now have their space program based on CubeSat technology. Commercial customers that we have are offering radio RF surveillance services across the entire globe and increasing their capacity of the satellites. So that's a new enabler of the smaller satellites, is that you start with a smaller number of satellites, 1, 2, a small constellation, 4, and then as you generate more revenues, you can continue to scale up your constellation as your business case scales up as well, and with the customers, with the service that you provide. So we're seeing more of that. And we are seeing as well the application for or the use of CubeSat technology for applications that require low Earth orbit because of the runtime, so the latency that you get in communication. One of the applications where we're seeing CubeSats being used is air traffic management. Where the communication with and the visibility of the traffic of the airplanes is usually limited to the land parts where you get the big radars, but those can also be seen and monitored from space, because particularly from LEO, because it's closer to the Earth. So we're seeing commercial case in that area as well. And overall, with the miniaturization of technology, we are starting to see more and more power per kilogram coming at smaller satellites. So that is enabling Starlink-like, technologically enabling Starlink-like constellations with smaller satellites. So all in all, it's a market that is developing and maturing, and benefiting from these 10 years of growth that we experienced.
Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you. Just a reminder, if you've got any questions for our panel, there's a little Q&A button in the bottom of your screen about there. If you want to ask any questions, please do. It's always better if we get a little bit more interactive. So finally, Mark, I think Eduardo mentioned small sats. Pascal in his opening talk mentioned access to space, and Andy was talking about all these new constellations that are being delivered. Could you tell us a little bit more about how launches and the low-cost access to space market is developing, and how it's facilitating those commercial space activities?
Yeah, I mean, I'm massively reassured by what I've heard thus far, having been sort of relentlessly focused on launch with a particular spaceport for the last 5, actually nearly 6 years, and we've always sort of bang the drum to say there's of course there's going to be market. I'm massively reassured by what I've just heard, which is great. So just to very quickly say what we do for the Spaceport 1. I'm not going to focus particularly on Spaceport 1 because I'd like to talk a little bit more broadly than that. But we essentially are the project management team for Spaceport 1, providing some technical expertise, but essentially corralling the project to hopefully some sort of successful conclusion over the next few years. I will focus my comments on the UK. So we have really, as a result of, I think, the government in Whitehall and then subsequently Scotland identifying that actually the value chain, which the others have already talked about, has a big hole in it, and that big hole is launch. And I'm particularly taken by Andy's comment about downstream, and I still don't see in the sort of national level that recognition of really how important the downstream element of the market is. So I see launch really being an enabler rather than an aspect in itself. But nevertheless, it has to be commercially viable, and I will return to that theme in a moment. One of the questions that I presented at a conference yesterday, and one of the questions we were asked there on the panel was, is there enough space for the currently 7 spaceports that are aspiring to deliver operational capability in the future? And the answer to that question is probably. A year or two ago, I've been repeatedly asked that question over the years, but a year or so ago, I sort of went on record to say that I didn't think there was much market for more than about 2. That didn't go down terribly well, as you can imagine. Actually, more recently, we've seen different versions of market analysis, and you kind of pick and choose what suits your argument best. But one of the bits of market analysis that came out earlier this year, which I think is probably perceived to be fairly credible, is that over the next 10 years, the UK probably has access to just shy of 1,000 launches, should the UK wish to be assertive around addressing that market, and therefore, in simple terms, that would probably support. It certainly supports more than 2. Might not support 7, but it will certainly support more than a couple. And I would say that the revenue assessment of that was, if we could attract all of that, then the addressable market is actually much bigger than that, but we could attract all that. That's deemed to be £5.8 billion worth of revenue for the UK, and I think that is something to pursue. Again, sort of picking up on the downstream thing. I mean, there are various different views, but the downstream market is generally perceived to be somewhere in the region of 80% of the total market. So if our little tiny segment of the value chain is 5.8 billion, I should say, then that would suggest that there's something really rather large to go after in downstream from the UK perspective. And I'd widen that to Europe actually as well. There's probably room for a lot of us. I think the other thing that's quite interesting, and one of the things that we've seen is that at the moment we are sort of relentlessly focused on providing suborbital launch for a number of different reasons, not least to de-risk ultimately going to orbital launch. One of the things that we've seen is that you can actually create the market as well. The suborbital launch market is not particularly well understood, but one of the things, and the example I always give, is the university head of department who has one of his PhD students walk through the door and say, I think it would be a great idea, Professor, if we did a launch, to which the answer is, well, how much is that going to cost? And I think what we've successfully seen, and this is genuinely true, is that our answer to that, how much will it cost, doesn't instantly turn the professor off, whereas the perception is that it's a massively expensive thing to do, and therefore is beyond the bounds of credibility. So I think all of the spaceports, and we are fairly collaborative now. So we try and tackle all of these things in a much more collaborative way than we did previously. You know, what does the customer want? Well, the customer wants reliability, wants to know that you can deliver what you say you can deliver. Actually, one of the things that's really important for the UK or anybody that's doing this is the ease of doing business, and I'll come back to that in a moment when I talk a little bit about regulation. But the primary thing is cost. The secondary thing is cost. The third thing, tertiary thing, is cost. So it has to be at a decent price point. Otherwise, frankly, and we've seen examples of this where the global nature of the market, and it's truly global. You know, we have lost a launch to Australia. I mean, it couldn't get more global than that. Why? Because Australia could deliver it at a cheaper price. So there's some very interesting things for us to learn as we move forward into it. Developing launches in the UK, Sky Aurora and Orbex are both developing launches, and they are, and again, I'm going to go back to a point that Andy made about environment. Environment is extremely important in launch. I think probably when we started out on this venture, environment wasn't sort of massively important to anybody. Now it's extremely important, not just for the launch itself, the contribution to the environment that Andy's already talked about, but also the production of vehicles. Both of those companies are producing as cleaner vehicles as they possibly can, and that's obviously a good thing. And then we've got the launches coming from overseas, the Lockheed Martin, LBL, and Virgin Orbit, who are both making excellent progress. So one of the things I would say about the 7 sites that we have in the UK is that I think we were all chasing the same dollar, and actually as time has moved forward, we've started to see subtle differentiations between the sites, which is quite interesting, and I think that will continue. For example, payload capacity. The sites actually have very different payload capacity capabilities, and that offers a degree of differentiation that probably will underpin the ability for more than one or two to survive. And I think that is a good thing. I'll briefly talk about regulation. We've been waiting for a very long time for regulation. The regulation allegedly is, I saw in a tweet, not a tweet, on LinkedIn, I think yesterday, from DFT, that the regulation is going to hit the ground on the 29th of July. I'll go back to my ease of doing business comment. The regulation is, we will see how it lands. But one of my current sort of bet noirs is that we really need to be extremely agile with the regulation and our ability to look at the regulation quite quickly and maybe amend it if we see that it is not supporting the commercial opportunity, and particularly the competitiveness of, in this case, the UK. And it will be the same for other countries as well. So the question for me, I think, was, well, the comment, I suppose, was, is it more accessible? The answer is absolutely yes. Space is becoming progressively more accessible. Eduardo's talked about this a little bit already. I think Eduardo made the comment about options. We're providing, it will provide a lot more options for customers as we move forward. I've talked about the cost effectiveness part of it, absolutely critical. I think it's probably number one on all of the Spaceports priority lists, is how to make the cost work so that what they provide is a sustainable business. And as somebody said yesterday, and I think this is a very good line, this is not about who gets to launch first. It's about the company that makes the first £1 million out of launching. That's the metric, and I think that is absolutely right. That is me, John.
Thank you very much, Mark. Again, if you have any questions, please come forward and put them in the Q&A. Just elaborating on some of the points that have already been raised, actually. So I think Pascal mentioned it, Andy mentioned it around, was it Planetin? They consider themselves more of a software company, and Pascal was mentioning it as it's more about the service than it is about the technology and the satellite now. I mean, Pascal, how do you see this market evolving then, if the entrants are looking more of delivering a service rather than, the satellite rather than being a space company, they're more of a service company? How do you see this market evolving? Oh, you're on mute, Pascal.
Thanks, John. Well, there are two ways to look at this service aspect. I mean, from the end user perspective, I mean, on the ground, on Earth, all the information and services and applications that Eduardo, Andy mentioned, as individuals, we are looking at them as service. We are completely agnostic about the technology which is used. We are just focusing about the information which is coming out of this, regardless whether it comes from space or terrestrial applications. And this is, by the way, creating a challenge to the space business. But upstream onto the value chain, I mean, the people who are investing into space also consider themselves now into a service approach. I'm sure Eduardo will confirm, but compared to a situation where before there was a lot of investment and capex investments needed, people are looking at access to space as a service, buying a satellite as a service, not even wondering how it is operated, making sure just there will be someone out there making sure about the setup of the satellite, the launch of the satellite, the operation of it, the ground segment which goes with it. As long as you carry my payload, I'm fine. So that's a completely different approach, which is creating other opportunities as well. Easiness to new ventures, to new initiatives to be launched. But that's also, I would say, creating a challenge that I would like to underline in this session. The more we go into that service approach, the more we stimulate, or the space segment, for the good thing, is stimulating services and data related services. That's also creating a weakness to which we all have to be pay attention to, is the cyber security aspect and the risk that it triggers. Because the more the space segment is commercially oriented, is visible, the more money and billions we generate, the more we attract cyber attacks, and we are vulnerable to cyber attacks. It was not the case in the 20 years ago. Space was very shy and discreet. It's not at all the case anymore. So we have people out there who are waking up, who are really sharpen their tools to attack whatever we put in place. And this is really a transformation of the space and commercial space market, which is really genuine and that we have to take into account. I think the European Space Agency has well understood this cybersecurity and has been a predominant pillar and focus of activity and concern within the European Space Agency, creating a European Space Agency Security Office. But this is only there to stimulate our collective attention and collaboration onto that risk that we have to pay attention. But it's part of the game. It's part of the commercial game. The more we develop, the more others will be trying to get a piece of the pie.
Indeed. So yeah, I had a question for Andy, and it's just escaped my brain, but I'll think about it again. So Andy, in terms of, yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So in terms of, you're going out there for investment and you're looking at these different financial models you mentioned for the resilience constellation. Coming back to this concept that space is now a service, are investors interested in the fact that it's space, or are they more interested in the type of service that you're providing?
Ooh, yeah, good question. Well, yeah, I'm sure investors come in many shapes and forms, sizes. I think well, Mark hit the nail on the head that I think most investors, whether they're even representing sovereign and wealth funds and the like, are looking for return. Sometimes I think as we go into a climate sort of aware future, some of that return there's what you call impact. So some investors are willing to take a more longer term risk and different types of return. And I think that's where you're going to find some interesting models of government and private sector investing, where it's obviously inherently risky. The outcomes are not certain because we can't predict the future. I think everything about space as a service, ground segment as a service, all this is wonderful. I think well done to all those that are looking at that way, because it's certainly for groups like ours means your risk profile, the responsibility of building all these building blocks yourselves is much easier, and sharing liability and risk with your service providers is an excellent model. Downstream, I think, we've got, in Earth observation, we've got a long way to go, because I still don't think in many areas we can guarantee the service that we'd like to offer. But that's the fault of people overselling. I mean, remote sensing's had decades of potential oversell of, we could do this, we could do that. Yeah, but then can you really? A certain SAR constellation that shall remain nameless keeps hitting the optical guys saying, yeah, you're struggling with cloud cover. We've got perfect, persistent monitoring. No, you don't, because you have duty cycle limitation. Don't pretend to me that you can monitor everything that I need to monitor all the time. So it's not true. So we still have to be very careful, because if I'm trying to sell them a solution to a government or an agronomist or a carbon trader that I can provide that data, they'll soon see through it when there are days and days when they can't get the data. So I still think we have to be a little bit careful at that end. And of course, that's ultimately where it comes from. I talk about SES. I mean, I remember the days when I used to model the value chain for satellite broadcast. It was brilliant. Half of the value of that market there was paying football players and movie stars for their films. The space part of that was maybe 3 to 5%. It's a whole value chain that had to work together, but it's still, but it relied heavily on the satellite part doing what it says it can do, which is broadcast the film or the movie or the football match when I need it. I still think we're some way from that, but I think that's where at the other end of it, the enabling technologies of AI, machine learning, modeling, we can learn a lot from the meteorologists about how you do a weather forecast. We still make a weather forecast with imperfect data, but and of course we all complain like hell when the weather forecast is wrong, as it invariably is in the UK. But we still rely on it. But I would say that's very different from anything else like economic statistics and forecast the GDP of a national economy. We're always going to get it wrong, but the models are still very useful in their way. So we just have to accept that our data, modeled and other aspects, have to come together to create this whole value chain. And I assume it will still take many decades for us to get to a mature Earth observation market in that sense. It's exciting because I think we realise that, and it's getting that way.
Okay, thanks, Andy. And Eduardo, I mean, Andy alluded there to things like AI and machine learning. Obviously opening this market up with CubeSats and nanosats to apply for different things. What are the different technologies that you're looking at for the future to let's say augment the capabilities that you have within GOMSpace? Is there any disruptive technologies that you expect to come down the line and make everything very different?
Yeah, or making everything slightly better. There are many of the things we mentioned on this talk today. Cybersecurity is obviously a concern that is growing globally, and we need to tackle that. The as a service model is also a significant part of it. In the end, customers are looking, or the customers to the customers in our case, they are looking for the entire value chain. They are looking to can we get the data that we bought the satellites for reliably and at the price point that is overall competitive. So that addresses that the overall cost of ownership of that data is based on the entire value chain. And as a service model helps to give more guarantee on what the customer is getting and what it's paying for. So that's a different way of looking into the space as an enabler of an industry.
Yeah.
So yes, so we as GOMSpace, we are investing on operations as a service, which in the end translates into the ability to get a satellite or a constellation of satellites being managed by GOMSpace on behalf of our customers. And once you are in that position, when you're managing satellites from multiple customers and several of them for each customer, you get to a point where you understand the satellites and the constellations a lot better than individuals can. And that's where things like AI and machine learning come into place, because for those technologies to be enabled, you need the data that fits and the large scale data that fits those models. So yes, we are looking holistically at the space value chain. We are looking for optimizations across the chain and the technologies that optimize parts of the link, but also provide an end-to-end solution to the customers.
Okay, thank you, Eduardo. We have a couple of questions come in now. I'll actually start with this question for Mark. As you mentioned, regarding the UK's policy regarding launch, this is particularly related to that, I guess, and other things. The UK has yet to, it's a question from Sean. The UK has yet to produce its strategy for space, hopefully remedied soon. Is this an encumbrance, or are we just getting on with it regardless? Do you want to put your...
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Sean. I think the answer is, I'm going to do the normal academic thing and say the answer is it depends. The answer is both. We need to see the strategy, see where we fit into it. This was a question that came up yesterday, actually. And I am hopeful, although not massively confident, but I'm hopeful that the launch part will get the emphasis that it requires in the national strategy. I think the second part of Sean's question is right. Do we just press on? And I think the answer has got to be yes. That's why I kind of put the figures in there, really, because this is not insignificant, and I do worry that that there is that is not really as widely recognised as it perhaps should be. So yeah, I mean, the fundamental thing really here is that we need to wait, see what it is, and I hope, but not confident, that launch will get the emphasis that it deserves. Other people have talked about this, actually, and that is the commercial government element here. I think there's a danger that if the national strategy errs more towards government, then they're going to miss a trick. That actually, you know, the commercial opportunity here is the big ticket item. You know, ultimately dual use, I think, is obviously important, but it's going to be very interesting to see. We don't know when we're going to see it. I've heard next month, in fact this month, aren't we now, 1st of July. I've also heard September. Okay. So we'll see.
Andy, anything to add to that?
UK space strategies. I mean, they've come and gone, haven't they? I mean, our strategy has been utilitarian since the year dot. Since the time of Thatcher and those who said, you know, we're going to go after Concorde rather than satellites because there was no future for satellites. And you know, you compare ourselves to even our nearest European neighbours, you know, of an equal economy. We haven't put the money in to claim to be a modern space power, but we are all trying to make that change. But it comes with some leadership. You need to back it up with resource, because I would say in most of these markets we're still heavily reliant on government spending. You know, about Elon Musk, you know, he's a very clever chap. He's obviously put a lot of his money in there, but he's also relying a lot on government contracts. So that last part would be the one for me. How is a strategy going to articulate government demand in a way that can complement commercial investment and services? And in Earth observation, I'm tired of talking about it, to be honest, because every department looks very, you know, myopically at its own issues and areas. But if we're a global economy, we've got to look at the world. And yes, we do well in some areas, but there's areas that we seem to be ignoring. A lot of the companies that I know who want to grow in this area could use some solid government contracts that will help them raise finance to
exactly,
etc., etc. I would like to see our strategies exhibit some of that kind of demand-led.
I mean, as we've got a bit of a UK-Luxembourg axis here, and Luxembourg has been quite successful, actually, in growing its space market. Pascal, have you got anything to sort of help in answering that the question with, or not, maybe not help, but the Luxembourg experience, I guess, of how Luxembourg has grown around the space market?
Yeah, sure. With pleasure. And maybe that could also address one of the questions which are asked here about the future of the commercial market. And I think the Luxembourg example is a good example of that, because I mean, we can look at the future of the commercial space market outside of the Earth observation that indeed we discussed a lot, going to much more into space exploration compared to what it was before, where it was mainly managed by governments and a big amount of national investment. Now we see a lot of commercial players going into space exploration. And actually, to your point, Luxembourg has quite well anticipated that, creating already 5 years ago a national program for space resources, as they call it, stimulating the exploration and the exploitation of space resources, space mining, going into space, putting in place all the means which would stimulate commercial players to enter into the game. And this has given to the country quite a well-advanced position into the European landscape on that aspect. And there are others and other elements which are also anticipated into Luxembourg, which are also relevant for future space commercial markets, like the space situation awareness, the management of the clean space, which is going to be a big issue for the future.
Yeah, definitely. Eduardo, anything to add to what Pascal's mentioned there in terms of why Luxembourg for GOMSpace?
Yes, there's several reasons for that, but the goal to enable the resource exploration is a long-term vision of the country, and it is on creating we strongly believe on creating that infrastructure that will enable that human endeavor. And that will eventually become a commercial endeavor. And part of it, we are involved with our deep space missions. We are bringing our satellites that have been traditionally used in the LEO context, low Earth orbit context, into deep space, and that is enabling to get and multiply the value of deep space missions by doing it at a lower cost price. But it also brings the quality of our satellites up, that we can then use the quality on the commercial missions that we have on LEO. So as a whole, I think the resource application or the resource exploration of space is a valuable challenge for commercial applications, but it also enables business cases right now that GOMSpace is exploiting together with the Luxembourgish ecosystem.
Okay, thank you, Eduardo. I've got time for one more question, and it's from Robin. In Red Kite's recent report on space in the OxChem ARC, we pointed out the opportunities for space to partner with adjacent sectors to solve problems, e.g. environment, mobility, health, and that public support should focus on developing markets for solutions, not specific technologies. Do you have any views on specific areas where you would like to see more investment? So unfortunately, we only have 2 minutes, so 30 seconds each on the specific sectors and where you'd like to see investment. Andy.
Cheeky boy. Yeah, excellent point. Well, yes, space does need long-term investment to de-risk key things. So I think there is a case for sector-specific, but obviously solutions. And I was talking a lot with some guys from the energy sector, and there's a lot of help we can provide, not just from Earth observation, but from SATCOM's positioning, navigation, timing, to the future decentralized energy sector. And I heard things I've never heard before, which excite me about what we can do to support the transition to a net zero energy economy. So yes, I would agree that there's probably room for a lot more investment on what would you call it, solutions approaches.
Thank you, Andy. Mark.
Yeah, two things really. First is that can I have a copy of the report? I've just had a quick look on Google and I can't find it, but I would love to see it because
we'll ask Robin.
Because the second part of this is I absolutely agree, and I do think there's a fantastic opportunity for us
Great, thanks, Mark. Pascal?
Yeah, I do of course concur with the focus which has to be put on environment care initiatives. But just to mention another one which is very important is the management of our spectrum, and the right use of the spectrum, which is a limited resources that we will all face should we work on space and terrestrial application. And there it's really important to foster the collaboration and the good use and the wise use of spectrum between terrestrial ground-based solution and space solutions, so that we are less exposed to spectrum and in a good way, and that we use that in an efficient way.
Thank you, Pascal. And finally, Eduardo.
Yeah.
Collaboration in specific sectors.
Yes, so where we see most constellations appearing is on the communication sector for various purposes, and that is also being driven by the machine-to-machine IoT and all of the industries that benefit from a lot of communication. So that's an area that will continue to grow and will continue to support space-enabled communication.
Thank you. And that was less than Eduardo, that was less than 30 seconds, unlike the other panelists. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so it comes, this session now comes to an end. So thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you on the next one. You'll get the usual publicity of that through LinkedIn and our website. So goodbye from me and goodbye from the panelists. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you, John.